Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this World Council of Credit Unions virtual event, Unlock Employee Performance Through Psychological Safety and Belonging. My name is Greg Newman, Director of Communications for World Council. Ayesha Howitt is an accomplished speaker and thought leader in the field of diversity, equity, inclusion, and reconciliation, or DEIR. In her role as the Director of DEIR at Vancity, a credit union in Vancouver, Canada, Ayesha provides strategic guidance, coaching, and support to employees throughout the organization, and her innovative approach has been critical in creating and leading Vancity's DER strategy. In today's fast-paced work environment, fostering a culture that promotes psychological safety and a sense of belonging among employees is essential. Ayesha will use her expertise and draw on some real-world examples and case studies during today's virtual event to illustrate how psychological safety and belonging can unlock performance and drive business success. If any questions come into your mind as you listen to today's webinar, please feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and type them in there. Ayesha will answer them as time allows. Also, this presentation is being recorded. It's also going to be available later today on the World Council YouTube channel. But without further ado, I want to bring in Ayesha Howitt. Welcome, Ayesha, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. My name is Ayesha Howitt, and I go by she, her pronouns. I am the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Vancity Credit Union. And today I'll be talking to you about how you can unlock employee performance through psychological safety and belonging. So I'm going to start off by acknowledging that I'm calling from the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish, represented by the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam First Nations. As I reside on these lands, I commit to fostering a relationship built on respect, collaboration, and reconciliation. I acknowledge the historical and ongoing injustices faced by Indigenous peoples, including the impacts of colonization and the need for healing and restoration. We recognize that reconciliation requires more than words, and it demands action. So in my work and personal life, I continue to learn, listen, and amplify the voices of Indigenous peoples and communities. I commit to actively engaging in the process of decolonization and dismantling the systemic barriers and support self-determination for Indigenous peoples. With that, I'd like folks to pause for a moment and imagine a workplace where every voice is valued, risks are embraced, and individuals feel a deep sense of belonging. What does that look and feel like to you? Can you think back to a time where you felt truly connected and supported at work? A time when your voice mattered and your ideas were welcomed? Have you ever been in a meeting where everyone hesitates to speak up, afraid of judgment or repercussions? As mentioned, in a rapidly changing world, organizations that prioritize psychological safety and belonging thrive. Today, we'll uncover the secrets of building psychological safety, the magic that goes into it, empowering your team, sharing ideas freely and fearlessly, recreating the sense of connection and support. Our goal in this session is really to help you understand the innovation, collaboration that can happen that in turn creates that employee well-being. So with that, today we'll be going through what is psychological safety and belonging, why it's important to your credit union, how you can create it, and how these two concepts together can be really powerful and unlock both innovation and performance. The learning objectives today, through this session, you'll see through the learning objectives, we'll be exploring the deep understanding of and like significance of psychological safety and belonging in the workplace, specifically why it's important and how both of these two together can create a crucial employee well-being, engagement, and organizational success. We'll review strategies and ways you can create psychological safety. We'll delve deep into practical strategies, actionable steps, such as encouraging open communication channels, establishing clear role expectations, behavior, and performance. Additionally, we'll also go through what psychological safety is not. and making sure we sort of myth bust on what it is and what it isn't. We'll examine how psychological safety can help innovate and create those high-performing teams. And then in the end, we'll go through, if you have any other questions or if I haven't covered anything, there'll be an opportunity to delve deeper into that. So with that, let's go into what psychological safety is. Psychological safety is a term that has gained incredible popularity over the years, and for good reason. It refers to the perception that individuals have the consequences of taking interpersonal risks in their work environment. This means that employees feel comfortable to speak up, offer new ideas, and take initiative without the fear of consequences. The benefits of psychological safety are numerous. They can significantly impact employee performance and organizational success. When employees feel safe, they're more likely to engage in behaviors that lead innovation, creativity, and collaboration. With that, psychological safety can really improve employee well-being and reduce stress. When employees feel safe, they're less likely to experience anxiety, depression, and burnout. And we know all of these things have been incredibly heightened over the past couple of years. So with that, by fostering psychological safety, organizations can retain top talent, attract diverse perspectives, and improve overall business objectives. Just going back to the last slide to really reiterate what psychological safety is not. What I'd actually like to reiterate is the risk of not having a psychologically safe work environment. So when we think about it, when employees actually experience an unsafe work environment, what can happen is when you're particularly in credit unions, an employee may see or experience bullying, harassment, discrimination in the workplace. If there isn't that psychological safety to report or inform their manager, or they do not have that trusting relationship with their manager, what can happen is, the individual doesn't feel safe, but then other folks that actually see that event see that there may not be safety in the workplace to actually report this particular incident. With that, you can have, decreased employee well-being, higher turnover, there can be lack of trust. And then as a result, there can be reputational and brand damage. And then when we think about it from a legal perspective, when people don't report or they see and experience this unsafe work environment, there are legal repercussions as a result, whether that be legal claims, investigations, or reputational damage. So not only is this just crucial to business success, but it also will help mitigate risk. So when we think about what are the key components of psychological safety, trust is the cornerstone. It involves building mutual respect, credibility, and reliability amongst your team members and leaders. When trust is established, team members feel confident that their ideas and contributions feel valued and respected. For example, Google found that teams with higher levels of trust outperform any other teams because they're willing to take risks and collaborate more. Dr. Patricia Hewlin actually does a lot of research on this, which I'll cite later on. But one of her particular lines talks about consistency builds trust, not perfection. And the reason I share this is a lot of leaders feel like they need to be perfect, but in reality, they need to be consistent. And so with that, kind of moves to the next point around vulnerability. Vulnerability is about being open and authentic, even when it means admitting you've made mistakes or you need help. We know that, utilizing the growth mindset, which is where you learn from mistakes and you're not taking that punitive approach to when people fail or make mistakes. Not only does that build a more agile team, but you end up actually having better products, better services, and people feel more inclined to take risks, which is crucial component to psychological safety. One thing I want to mention around the vulnerability is this vulnerability cannot just happen in your frontline staff. All employees, leaders in particular, need to lead the way. And I've seen this be incredibly powerful at Vancity, where a leader can be very vulnerable to where they're at in the moment, or whether it be work or personal life. And what it does is it level sets, it gives perspective, but it also opens the door for others to in turn be vulnerable. The other piece which goes in nicely when it comes to vulnerability is that open communication. So open communication is essential to psychological safety. It involves the active listening component, constructive feedback, and encouraging that honest, transparent dialogue, also known as candor. When team members feel heard, understood, they're more likely to contribute ideas, brainstorm, and also offer like concerns or risks. So one example of this is at Zappos. They have actually what's called the speak up culture, where employees are encouraged to voice their opinions and challenge the status quo. I've seen this be incredibly beneficial when it comes to in our workplace at Vancity. When projects or programs are put forward, we have dialogue where we can give critical feedback without it being taken personally. And we've done that by creating sort of a charter around feedback on how people want to receive it. So one thing I want to note is what psychological safety is not. Psychological safety is not about always being nice. It is about, and it's not necessarily having a polite work environment. What it is having a culture where you can give feedback in a empathetic and powerful way. You know, feedback being critical of like timely, specific, using those components. The other myth that I want to highlight is it isn't about always feeling comfortable in psychologically safe environments. Often people think that, you know, you need to feel comfortable all the time in order to feel safe. That's not necessarily true. So learning, making mistakes, that's uncomfortable. But what we can do is instead of being punitive or critical to mistakes, we can actually reframe it as saying, what did you learn from this? And what will you do for next time? And that can really flip the experience for both the employee that made the mistake, but the manager as well, because then we can share those learnings for future projects or programs or services. So moving to practical strategies, and this is where we can really think about how do we actually take this cerebral concept and put it into action. So when we think about practical strategies, these things are having, you know, open communication and respectful dialogue, establishing clear expectations, promoting that culture of continuous learning and welcoming mistakes in a way that can really help improve things. And then recognizing and rewarding individuals for taking risks. So specifically when it comes to open and respectful communications, things like team meetings on a regular occurrence, with that charter around what it means to have that team meeting. What is the purpose of it? How are we going to share different ideas in a way that isn't going to make people feel attacked or criticized, but in a way that ultimately we're going to get to a better outcome? So one thing to note with that is when you're creating these open communication channels, it's helpful to work with your team when it comes to what that actual charter or team charter is going to look like. How are you going to work together to amplify voices that may not feel comfortable in team settings? The other piece is establishing clear expectations in your work, the behavior, and your performance. We know that the number one contribution to psychological well-being in the workplace is clear role accountabilities. So when people have clear role accountabilities, that can help put people at ease, because when you don't have that, people often tend to overfunction. And when we overfunction, it can crowd other people's work and roles, and then they themselves feel like, oh, isn't that my work? Or isn't like, where's our lines? So when you have clear role accountabilities, it's very helpful and powerful for individuals. Another piece is like promoting that culture of continuous learning. So organizations that really encourage that growth mindset of emphasizing how mistakes and failures can be opportunities for learning and growth can really be powerful. We learn so much quicker through mistakes if we're in an environment that actually encourages it. So providing resources to individuals on skill development or workshops or training programs that can really help individuals work through that can really help when it comes to that, promoting that type of culture. The other piece would be, rewarding, recognizing, taking risks, and sharing new ideas. So in some places, and particularly at Vancity, what we've done is actually share where we've made mistakes and how we've gone through them. Again, it sort of moves away from this culture of hiding mistakes and actually amplifying and sharing the learnings from this. And again, leader-led can be so powerful because, again, it helps people feel at ease that it is okay to make mistakes. So now we're going to move on to what is belonging. Belonging, it refers to that feeling of being accepted, valued, and included within a group or organization. It is that sense of connection and community that people experience when they feel that they are part of something bigger. Belonging has a significant benefit for both organizations and employees. When employees feel a sense of belonging, they are more likely to be engaged, motivated, and committed to do work. They also are more likely to collaborate and communicate effectively with their colleagues, leading to higher levels of productivity and innovation. When employees feel like they belong, they are less likely to actually experience stress, anxiety, and burnout, similar to psychological safety. And so you can see how these two concepts are very interwoven. However, they're distinct. They can be interdependent on each other. So when we create that sense of belonging, it requires intentional effort from leaders and managers. It involves us to creating that culture that values diversity of thought, that amplifies equity in decision-making, and ensures inclusion when we come to whether it be decision-making, hosting of meetings, but also providing employees with that opportunity to connect and build that relationship with one another. So some examples of this, and then I'll move on to the impacts, is employee resource groups can be really crucial to creating that sense of belonging in organizations. Mentorship programs can also be, as well as team building activities, which I'll go into more detail on what those particular pieces can really help with creating that sense of belonging. So the impacts of belonging. So I've highlighted a little bit around what this can do, but it can increase that job satisfaction and well-being component. It can enhance collaboration and teamwork. You can have higher levels of creativity and innovation, and you have that employee retention and loyalty. So when employees feel that sense of belonging, they're more satisfied to do their work. And as a result, the organization, it all leads to greater job satisfaction and a sense of fulfillment. When folks have higher sense of, or that enhanced collaboration and teamwork, belonging can create that sense of camaraderie, collaboration amongst team members. Harvard Business Review actually created or did a whole series around having a best friend at work and the power that can have. When you feel like you belong and you have that feeling that you can go to somebody and share truly how you're feeling and then show up to a meeting without that sort of feelings, it can be very powerful and profound for those individuals. In addition, as mentioned, it can create those higher levels of creativity and innovation. It allows people to share and like give more different ideas without this fear of repercussion. When people feel like they're valued, they're more likely to contribute in meetings. And that diversity of thought is really valued versus discouraged. So when people have that higher sense of belonging, they're more motivated to contribute. They feel a sense of ownership and pride in their work, which again, ultimately leads to that higher level of engagement and discretionary effort. So we're going to move on to some practical strategies of how we foster belonging. So things like team building activities, social events, this can be something both done through a hybrid work environment or in person. Sharing some examples that we've done at Vancity. We're in a hybrid work environment. So for us, what we've done is every 2 months, we have what's called 3 C days. The 3 C's are connection, collaboration, and celebration. And so the parameters around that is really to enhance that sense of belonging and psychological safety. What we do in those meetings is we try and have as many in-person meetings with our leaders and what we call first team, so sort of your colleagues. And then what we do is also try to have some sort of, whether it be a potluck or team get-togethers, again, to create that sense of community and connection for folks. In addition, we're continuing to refine the program. We're gaining feedback from people through various aspects. So whether that be in anonymous forums or having, feedback sessions after the 3C days, this helps us continue to refine the experience, but also ensure people's feedback is taken into account for future events. Another way we can create this sense of belonging is again, having those like lunch and learn or coffee talks, again, for people to share themselves outside of their work. And we find that really important when it comes to creating that relational aspect for individuals. Other pieces like celebrating, milestones, project successes, team achievements. We often are in this fast-paced environment where we're just looking for the next project, when often we know that reflection can really help enhance future projects, learning, as well as really give people that sense of accomplishment and achievement. And oftentimes we forget the importance of actually pausing, celebrating, and sitting with the achievement of a project being completed. The other piece is promoting that inclusivity or diversity in decision-making. So in this, one aspect that we've actually incorporated is rotating hosts of meetings. So oftentimes before we would have, the leader always host team meetings. Instead, this is actually an Indigenous practice where you decentralize the power of hosting and really make clear expectations on how that host is going to care for the space, but also incorporate different elements and individuals in that particular meeting space. So inclusive team practices is really crucial to this piece. How are we going to ensure the folks that may tend to be quieter in meetings can also contribute in a way they feel safe, whether that be through Teams channels. So, if you have Slack or Teams, things like that can really help different individuals contribute to meetings. The other piece is, providing training on that unconscious bias. And the reason I share this is unconscious bias, we all have it, but also being able to have that level set where everybody has the training can really help when it comes to decision making. What biases are you taking into account, consciously or unconsciously? And do you have a safe work environment where people can actually call you in to say, it sounds like you're actually really, making a decision based on your recency bias. And here's what I think. When you can do that, again, the power of perspective really helps in your decision making because people feel safe enough to give you their input and feedback. And so again, creating that awareness is really crucial when it comes to that inclusivity and diversity of perspective in decision making. The other piece is developing a culture that values and respects different perspectives. So when we encourage that cross collaboration in projects, we bring individuals with different experiences and perspectives, which often can help make projects and programs even better. Again, using an example from Vancity, we recently reviewed both of our pension program, but also our benefits program, and deliberately looked at it from a DEIR perspective, so diversity, equity, inclusion, and reconciliation. We looked at the benefits we had and what we wanted to provide and really incorporated that equity lens. And that's really provided us with a perspective of how can we support our employees from that equity standpoint. In addition, our employee resource groups can really provide that platform for employees from shared backgrounds to have that common ground and cultural safety to contribute to organizational initiatives. So we have an employee resource group program manager that helps both provide guidance, but also safety in that they're not, the employee resource groups are not just being constantly validating work. They get to pick and choose what work they're doing, which again gives power, control, and authority to these employee resource groups on what work they want to provide insights to. So moving on to why both of these are important. So Dr. Patricia Hewlin, her research on workplace facades really provides insights. And again, I'll be providing the slide deck as well as all the resourcing related to this. But Dr. Patricia Hewlin has done a lot of research on workplace facades and the insights and importance to psychological safety in the workplace. And its impact on performance. Her research really highlights the detrimental effects of facades and masks, which people often feel compelled to wear in a workplace when they don't feel that sense of psychological safety. When employees perceive a workplace is lacking that, they tend to hide their true selves. They often will conform to expectations and avoid negative consequences. So when we have that psychological safety, people tend to bring their whole selves to work. They'll express their ideas openly. They'll take risks without fear of negative consequences. And they're more likely to share their diverse perspectives. So as we know, psychological safety can enhance employee engagement, increase risk-taking in an innovative stance, improve team dynamics and collaboration, enhance well-being and satisfaction, and really help retain top talent, which we know is so crucial when it comes to the talent market right now. So now we're going to move on to how does belonging and psychological safety unlock that employee performance? So I've kind of put that through the session a little bit, but I'll be providing some case studies, particularly some research that really reiterates this. So leaders that create that culture of open communication, feedback, and transparency really help unlock that employee performance. They model the behavior they want to see in their employees by being approachable, empathetic, supportive, and organizations can also provide training on how managers and leaders can communicate effectively, but then provide that critical, empathetic, inclusive feedback. How they manage conflict in a restorative way. These skills are critical to creating that environment of trust and respect. And by focusing on these pieces, you'll really both establish that psychological safety, but unlock employees' full potential. So there's growing research on psychological safety and belonging. And this isn't like some of this is dating back to 2012. So this isn't a new concept. But what's interesting is Harvard Business Review actually just published a new article on the importance of psychological safety in April 2013 this year. But the research going back to Google, they actually did a project back in 2012 where they did a study on what makes a team effective. And after they analyzed the data from hundreds of teams, Google found that psychological safety was the most important factor in predicting team performance. Teams with higher levels of psychological safety were more productive, innovative, and achieved better results. Another research is Deloitte actually did a research in 2018 where in the report called Diversity and Inclusion Revolution, which found that inclusive teams outperform their peers. The report found that companies with inclusive cultures are twice as likely to meet and or exceed financial targets, and 3 times more likely to be a high performing, and 6 times more likely to be innovative. With that is cumulative to have an 8 times more likely to achieve better business objectives. And finally, an older article, but it talks about from Harvard Business Review, high performing teams need psychological safety. And this one cites the key ingredients of performing high performing teams, one of which is the psychological safety. They did a research in a hospital unit and found that they even had lower mortality rates and higher level of job satisfaction. So with that, you can see that psychological safety and belonging are crucial to high performing teams, that sense of employee engagement and well-being, but also will ultimately impact your bottom line, innovative ideas, and better member experience for individuals. So with that, I'm going to invite folks to think back to sort of the slides that I've sort of gone through. What's one thing you're taking away from this session? And I encourage you to put it in the chat. And what's one thing you're leaving in this session? You'll take some water. So one thing I'd like to just reiterate by, when we're thinking about the learnings from this session, the importance of actually creating sustainment when it comes to these learnings. So we know that when we go to learning sessions, that if we don't actually think about how we can sustain this learning, we often lose 60% of the learning that we've gone through. So it's really important for us to think about ways in which we can sustain some of this. So I'm seeing in the chat a lot around the celebration, the 3C days. That's awesome. Yeah, it's not an either or. Taking the time to reflect, absolutely. Yes, we need a speak up culture for everyone to feel safe. The team charter, absolutely. This is great. Awesome. So I just want to put it out to the group that if there's anything else on your mind that I haven't covered in this session, please feel free to put it in the chat and I can do my best to answer. But I'm going to pass it over for the Q&A period.
Thanks, Ayesha. And if anybody does have questions, I know you're still putting things in the chat. We want you to continue to do that. And Ayesha's gonna look at those and make sure that she's seeing everything that everybody writes down. But if you have actual questions for her, feel free to put them in the Q&A section of the platform, of the Zoom platform. You can find that on the bottom of the screen. Q&A. You can just type your questions in there. One of the questions that I would have, Ayesha, after seeing this is this a learning experience for executives too? Because I know even going back 10, 20 years, CEOs back then and executives back then didn't necessarily want a culture of speaking up, I don't think. Is that changing? Is there a learning curve for executives too?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think leaders across the organizations, particularly executives, can benefit from creating that sense of psychological safety and belonging. We know that they set the tone, and if they have a more command and control, where do as I say, and I don't want to hear feedback, it stifles that creativity, innovation, and what can happen is we don't think about different experiences. One person cannot think about all the different risks to a situation. And so when we think about it, even from a risk perspective or opportunity perspective, we're not actually getting the most out of our people when we only have sort of one mind leading an organization.
I have a question from Caroline who asks, what is the role of reconciliation in psychological safety and belonging moving forward? I would add too that, here in the United States, and I don't know how it is elsewhere, but we hear DEI a lot. We don't hear DEIR. Is that a Canadian specific thing? Is this something we're going to see more of in the rest of the world?
Yeah, so I would say, Vancity has reconciliation as one of its core values since 2015. And so for us, it was really important to incorporate, amplify, and highlight that reconciliation is part of our equity stance. And so for us, I think particularly at Vancity Credit Union, DEIR is part of the portfolio, but we also have other areas of the organization that hold pieces of this work as well. I would say when it comes to the intersecting point of psychological safety and reconciliation, I would say there is a component of doing the work of creating that cultural safety. So it isn't just the cultural sensitivity, but it's creating that cultural safety for Indigenous folks. And that requires time, effort, but also care. And so it's taking the time to learn and unlearn the historical elements and present elements of Indigenous, oppression and discrimination that's happening. It's also taking into consideration how you can create an environment that is culturally safe for Indigenous individuals.
Well, hopefully we'll get a few more questions here from the audience. But another question, I guess, that comes to mind for me is, I think sometimes people who aren't as engaged in this and are asked to be engaged in it can get a little nervous and not know what is something that you can talk about in that DEI space, and what things aren't things that you can talk about in that DEI space. Are there parameters as you see them? You just mentioned what the meaning of reconciliation means. There are things that you would say are on the table or off the table.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fear of making a mistake is probably folks' biggest barrier to actually discussing DEIR work. Being called out or called in is something that has often happened to myself. I am constantly learning in the space. And so I think there is a level of comfort that folks need to have with being called in. And I think folks can do it in a way with that sense of psychological safety, of doing it in a way that can inform that individual on maybe how their words or the way they did it, again, that intent versus impact can happen. But I think it shouldn't prohibit people from talking about things. I think it's helpful when we can name what's happening in the room, when we can name power imbalances or the fact that we don't have representation of a particular identity group, and saying, hey, we don't have X, Y, and Z voice at the table here. How are we going to ensure that that voice is represented in this group? Who are we going to pull on and say we don't have that voice, and therefore we need to either consult it out or bring somebody in? Great question. Oh, I think you're on mute, Greg.
You mentioned unconscious bias at the beginning, at the start of this session. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and what some of the strategies are to move past them as an individual or even as an organization? Because all of us bring that, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, unconscious bias are how our brain actually disseminates information. We're getting 10,000 pieces of information a day, and our unconscious biases actually help us formulate what we're going to listen to and what we're not. And so there's different elements to unconscious bias, whether it be, your recency bias or your halo effect. You can do a whole session on unconscious bias, but I think how we get past them is taking the training, but then setting up, having that safety within your team to actually call people in when you're potentially making decisions based on unconscious bias. So I've had examples where it's like, I want to make this decision. Can I check my biases with you? And I actually say that with a colleague, or they do that the same with me. Again, having that best friend at work or colleague that you feel that safety to bring your whole self and say, this is what I'm thinking, am I off? It can be really helpful.
Somebody else mentioned, well, we have a question here from Clement. He asks, how does a credit union approach a situation where they realize there is no sense of belonging in the organization? And that's probably not.
Oh, you cut out there. Sorry, Greg.
Sorry, my headset here is dying a little bit. Clement asks, how does a credit union approach a situation where they realize there's no sense of belonging in the organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it is highlighting the risk to ultimately the leadership team, because they can set the tone and actually make it a priority. As a leader or employee in the organization, you can highlight both the session, but also the research that talks about the importance of psychological safety and belonging, but also the risk of not having it. I find that when we can highlight the risk of not doing something or the risk of having an unsafe work environment, it can really help illuminate some of these cerebral concepts that can feel fluffy, for lack of a better word. So I think starting there with gaining some executive buy-in or support, and then doing sort of that foundational work, right? So whether that be some training, setting up the culture pieces where you have a culture of feedback, where you are creating that team environment that's going to create that inclusive belonging feeling, will be really helpful.
Switched out here, so we're much better with the microphone. We have one more question here that just came in as well. Any advice for a DEI committee that's in its first year at a smaller credit union? Anything that they should consider right off the top?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big, broad question, but I think it depends. DEI is big. It is a large, both in breadth and depth, but I think it is getting clarity on what area of DEI you want to focus on, whether that be gender, race, ability, and then creating a strategy with specific concrete pieces that you can move forward. I think it's helpful to actually, create KPIs, so key performance indicators related to that, but then also getting that executive buy-in, because then you can actually show the impact of implementing some of those particular programs. But I think it is, for lack of using a terminology of boiling the ocean, if you do everything, you're not actually going to move anything more than an inch. Whereas if you have that focus and intention, you'll have greater impact.
Catherine asks, do you have suggestions for fostering belonging over remote workspaces and multiple locations? And I know that's something that every organization is trying to figure out, not just with DEI, but in a lot of things. But I'm sure DEI, it really impacts it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, creating that sense of belonging in a remote world is I think, getting feedback from employees on what would creating that sense of community look like. So often your employees, we've done things like where people have virtual dance parties, or we do a lunch and learn where it's virtual. I've often tried to move away from doing the virtual because I think people are really tired of being on screen again, and doing things as simple as doing walking meetings where you have your headphones in and can go for a walk. And it changes the whole experience for individuals, for that sense of connection. I think it's important to create your one-on-ones with your employees that aren't always just focused on work. So using that forward model of family, relationship, dreams, and the other one, but I can send the link on that. But again, using these models that really can help bring that inclusive leadership style will set that tone and in turn create that culture of belonging.
All right. Well, we really appreciate your time today. That's all we have right now for the questions, and I want to give, if we can, people a few minutes of their lunch hour back here or wherever you are in the world. Maybe it's your dinner hour. I don't know, but really great stuff, Ayesha, and really appreciate your time. Is there anything you want to add before we go?
No, just thank you everybody for the opportunity to share, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Thanks. We really enjoyed having you. Well, if you liked this event and you want to rewatch it, or you wanted to show it to someone else at your credit union, you can refer them to the World Council YouTube page. That is at youtube.com/woku. It will be available there later today. And just an FYI, if you feel you got a lot out of this presentation, you want to be part of more sessions like it, but in person next time, be sure to register for our 2023 World Credit Union Conference, which we are actually co-hosting with the Canadian Credit Union Association from July 23rd to the 26th in Vancouver, Canada. Registration is open until July 5th at wcuc.org. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Have a great day.